Noon pa man, malaki na ang naging bahagi ng mga kababaihan sa lipunang Pilipino. Kaisa sila sa marubdob na paghahangad ng kalayaan ng ating lahi. Kabilang sila sa paglinang ng ating makulay na sining at mayamang kultura. Kasapi sila sa pagtataguyod ng mga adhikain ng kapwa mamamayan at sa pagtugon sa mga pangangailangan ng lipunan. Katuwang sila sa pagtuklas sa mga larangan ng agham at medisina. Kapanalig sila sa pagpapairal ng batas, karapatan at katarungan para sa lahat. Kabahagi sila sa paglilingkod sa bayan at sa pagpapanatili ng demokrasyang Pilipino. Sa paglipas ng panahon, hindi nagmaliw ang kanilang pag-ibig sa ating inang bayan. Mga kababayan, ito ang alay ng mga kababaihang Pilipino para sa bayan. Tumayo po tayong lahat at sabay-sabay nating awitin ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Ayaw magiliw, pero sa silanganan, alam ng puso, sa dilim mo'y buhay. Lupang hiniram, dulot ka ng magiging, sa manlulubi, di ka masisingil, sa dagat tulog sa singil at sa langit mong babang, may nilagang tula at awit sa tunay ang minamahal. Ang isang ng patawad mo'y tagumpay na naglilingin, ang bituin at araw ng kailan pa malimatin. Lumarang araw ng 100% buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang higaya ng pag-ay makakamit, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
For the conduciveness of our webinar, we would like to request our participants to adhere to the following virtual conference etiquette. First, kindly change your meeting ID to this format, acronym of the institution you are affiliated with, dash full name. Example, PUP-1 De La Cruz. Otherwise, you may use your full name as meeting ID. Also, remember that your microphone and video camera are disabled by default. You may enable them if it is your turn to interact. Be respectful. Don't interrupt the presenter and keep your mic on mute and camera off while someone is presenting to avoid unnecessary distractions. Be an active participant. Provide inputs and respond to the speaker's request for comments and questions. Next. Questions and clarifications will be entertained after the presentation. You may use the chat box for the facilitators to note them, state your name and institution, and ask questions concisely. Comments that will benefit others are most welcome. Also provide feedback. Help us improve our online events to better understand your needs and preferences. For our registered participants who are on Facebook, make sure that you have answered the survey feedback to ensure that you will receive an e-certificate. Whenever disconnected in the Zoom meeting, please log in again using the link, or you may join us at facebook.com/PUP Alumni Official. So to formally start our event, let us welcome the Dean of the College of Science, Dr. Lincoln A. Bautista, for his welcoming remarks. Dr. Lincoln?
Thank you, Engineer Tubola. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, good morning to everybody. Isang maulang magandang umaga para sa ating lahat. Ang PUP po ay patuloy na naghahanap ng mga kaalaman. At ngayong umagang ito po ay mapakinggan natin ang isa na naman sa mga scientist, isa sa mga dalubhasa sa larangan naman po ng Geosciences. Magandang umaga po sa pinaka-tipitaganan namin at ginagalang naming presidente ng PUP, Dr. Manuel Muhi. Magandang umaga po sa mga organizers ng PCHLS. Session 10. Naka-10 na tayong sessions pala. Sa mga nakikinig ngayon at magpa-participate sa isang sasabihin ko na siguro worthwhile at pipilitin siguro ng ating speaker na maging entertaining ang ating session ngayong umagang ito. Magandang umaga po, Dr. Graciano Yumul. Ang inyo pong pagsasalita ngayon ay aming pinakakaabang-abangan at kami pong lahat ay excited na mapakinggan po kayo. At kami po ay welcome namin kayong lahat dito sa Professorial Chairholders Lecture Series Session 10. Nawa ay tayo makinig na mabuti at ating unawain mabuti ang sasabihin ng ating speaker ngayong umagang ito. Muli, welcome po sa ating umagang ito. Sir Tubola.
Thank you, Dr. Bautista. To formally start and introduce our Professorial Chairholder Lecturer, let us welcome the co-chair of the Professorial Chairholder Lecture Series, Engineer Joselinda Golpeo.
So good morning, everyone. Our professorial lecturer for today is a graduate of BS in Bachelor of Science in Geology at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He took his Master of Science and Doctor of Science in Geology at the University of Tokyo. And he took up an advanced management program, UANP and IESE Business School, University of Navarra in Spain. He is currently a Senior Vice President of the Cordillera Exploration Company Incorporated. He is also an adjunct professor at the UPLB School of Environmental Science and Management. Of course, he is a professorial chairholder of the Polytechnic University of the Philippines. He is also an editorial advisory board member of the Journal of Asian Earth Sciences, Geoscience Journal, Resource Geology. Some of his past positions include being the Executive Vice President of Apex Mining Company Incorporated, a Board Director of the Itogon Suyok Resource Incorporated, an Undersecretary of the Department of Science and Technology. He is also a former Executive Director of the Philippine Council for Industry and Energy Research and Development, the former Director and Professor at UP Diliman National Institute of Geological Sciences, and a geologist of the Bureau of Mines and Geosciences. Some of the awards that he received includes the following. He became an outstanding young scientist for geology from the National Academy of Science and Technology in 1993. He is also an outstanding young Filipino, TOYM, for Science and Technology, given by Philippine Geosciences Incorporated in 1996. And in 1997, he is an awardee for the Achievement Award for Earth Science under the National Research Council of the Philippines. In 2001, he received an Outstanding Teacher for College category under the Metrobank Foundation Incorporated. And in 2002, he received the Gawad Chancellor para sa pinakamuhusay na mananaliksik sa UP Diliman. And in 2012, he received the Outstanding Geologist Award from the Professional Regulation Commission. He is also a CESO 1 holder for Career Executive Service Board and a competent person or qualified competent person for exploration under the Philippine Mineral Reporting Code. And his Google School scholarship include H-Index 32 and I-10 Index 90. Ladies and gentlemen, our professorial chairholder, Dr. Graciano P. Yumul Jr.
Yeah, thank you for that. Magandang umaga. So let me share my screen. All right. Can you see it now? We're good. Can somebody just tell me if the screen is okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
It's
sir.
okay.
Okay, good. So with that, yeah, magandang umaga po. And thank you for giving me again the chance to give you a talk. So the reason, the motivation for this talk basically is that I'm very sure that the Polytechnic University of the Philippines is giving their students and definitely their faculty members all those hard technical skills at a high level that you really excel in your field of expertise. However, one of the things that we have recognized recently is that having this hard expertise, this hard technical expertise, is not enough for a simple reason that whether we like it or not, we have to deal with people, we have to deal with communities. And this is one of the trends right now that we're doing in geosciences. We're trying to equip most of our young geologists, or even those on the mature side, of having soft skills that basically deals on more on the social aspect of our job. So for this morning, it's really a presentation about how to become effective social performers. And since I'm a geologist, I'll be sharing insights from the geoscience field. So the outline is very simple. I'll try to show three theories or three parameters that I think scientists and engineers really ought to have an idea and more or less practice during their dealings and work with the community. One is the social license to operate, then the concept of ecological distribution conflict and why recently we have been having a lot of this. Then the social ecological imbalances, especially in the context of what happened in Northern Luzon, in the NCR, in Mindanao, and we try to weave all of these theories and try to come out with a possible preferred future through the thing called futures thinking. Then how can scientists and engineers be social performers? I'll be showing some guidelines, and at the end, I'll summarize everything. So you can see here, we're looking at basically three things about social performance. One is the improving field on the so-called environmental, social, governance parameters, the ESG parameters. And people right now are not anymore working on triple bottom line. It's basically quadruple bottom line. We're not looking only at people, planet, and profit, but there's got to be an ethical purpose why we're all doing this. All of these things are being done in order for us to attain the so-called UN Sustainable Development Goals. So what basically is the social license to operate? It's simply the community, the people that you're dealing with, agreeing with how you do your job, agreeing with how you approach them, agreeing on what the project is all about. This is important for a simple reason that if the community is not part and parcel of your equation, if the community is not on board on what you're doing, then the project is actually doomed to fail. So there are three normative elements important in the social license to operate. That will be legitimacy, credibility, and trust. You have to be legitimate in the sense that you engage all stakeholders, the weak, the strong, the people who others may not really want to talk to, but you have to talk to because they're part and parcel of the community. You have to listen to them. And after that, you have to make sure that you preserve your credibility. And how do you preserve your credibility? You do that by making sure that you are accountable and you deliver for whatever promises or commitment you have given to the community or to the people. And ultimately, the thing is you have to gain the trust of the community. Once you gain the trust of the community, then the whole thing is not anymore just transactional. The community now becomes a partner. The community now becomes a co-owner of the project. And how would you know that the community right now is a co-owner? If there would be problems on the project, it will now be the community actually depending on the project. Once you have done that, then you can be sure that you have earned the trust of the community. So whenever you sit down with your stakeholders, And whenever you're facing somebody on the other side of the table, you have to make sure that you more or less have an idea what kind of stakeholder you're dealing with. So in terms of the stakeholder theory, there are three parameters that you have to look into. One is power, second is legitimacy, third is urgency. If the other person on the other side of the table would have power and legitimacy, then he will be a dominant stakeholder. So you should be able to know how to deal with a dominant stakeholder. However, if your stakeholder will be legitimate, but there's a sense of urgency that they want the project to push through, then you're basically dealing with a dependent stakeholder. And in this way, the company would actually have the upper hand. But if you're dealing with somebody that has the power, he knows that he calls a shot, he knows that he has the last say, and there is actually a feeling of urgency with regards to the project, then that will be a dangerous stakeholder. Now, the power, legitimacy, urgency, the way they work with each other would actually define your stakeholder. And this is the reason why before you talk to people, you have to make sure whom you are talking with. I'm pretty sure that for a PUP management, before somebody comes to talk to them, the first thing that they would ask actually their technical staff would be to ask for a curriculum vitae of whoever is coming to them for a simple reason that is critical that you should actually know whom you're talking or whom you're dealing with. But aside from this, what is critical also is that you should be able to take care that you're able to handle the so-called non-stakeholder. Excuse me. What are these non-stakeholder? These are people or institutions that have nothing to do with the project, but would always come out with issues against the project. And in the Philippines, we always see this. The projects is in Mindanao, but the people from the Visayas or Luzon are the ones complaining. Again, whether you like it or not, as a social performer, you have to really also handle the so-called non-stakeholder. So there are three ways in handling the community or the stakeholder in terms of the stakeholder theory. That's descriptive, instrumental, normative. If you start telling the community what the project is all about, that we're going to build a factory here, then you're basically doing it in a descriptive way. And if you're going to say that by building this factory, we will hire the people, we will make sure that everybody will be on board, then you're explaining to them how the project will push through. Then that's basically instrumental. But the more critical thing in coming out to the project involving the community is the normative way. And this is explaining to the people, to the community, why this project is important, why putting up this building is critical, what is the significance of this to their children, what's the significance of this to the community. The normative way would actually have a moral and philosophical function that it basically earns the trust more often than not of the community. Now, if you start with the descriptive way, if you enter into the community and you have a project and you start the descriptive way, answering the what and telling them how this is going to be done based on literature and based on application, more often than not, the project will not be able to get a social license to operate. But if you start from the normative scheme, wherein you explain to people what the project is all about and what is the relevance of this in their lives, to their children, to the community, and you work yourself outside, telling them how this is going to happen, ultimately, the community will be on board and the chances of getting a social license to operate would actually be bigger. So the golden circle theory of inside out is that when dealing with the community, start with answering the why, the normative scheme. And the descriptive or the what can actually just be a bonus. You may actually really convince the community that they will be the one already telling you that they should have actually the project. So the social license to operate actually is also a function of time. It's important that you know the people, the community for a long time. Yes, it's critical because through time you come to really learn the details, how people act, how people think. But what is also critical is your engagement quality. You may actually be staying long in the community, but if you're not engaging with the community, then that longevity does not mean anything. The quality of engagement, the quality of talking to people, the quality of communicating with the stakeholder is very important. Another thing that people tend to forget, especially the younger batch of people, is that parameters change through time. More often than not, we stand on the shoulders of giants. So what we do is just we try to continue what the giants have started to do. But you ought to remember that what was agreed upon with the father may not necessarily be true with the children. Parameters change. And you have to make sure that you're aware of this because this is more or less a case, a cause of problem with the community. Another thing is that, especially for Filipinos, Filipinos are very hospitable and they would always welcome visitors. They would always welcome companies. Then you have to put in your mind that acceptance is not approval. They're talking to you, the community talking to you, the community talking to the company does not necessarily mean that they're approving of the project. You have to work your way through for you to be able to get their approval and ultimately their co-ownership. So in the process, you also have to revisit all those agreements that was done 5, 10 years ago because they may not anymore be applicable now. And as I've said a while ago, parameters change through time. One of the reasons why there are a lot of conflicts between the community and the company and the people that represents them, in this case, the scientists and engineers, is that people would think that through time, things also should change. And it's incumbent upon the company to make sure that indeed agreements are actually updated, agreements really reflect whatever the community would really like to see. So so that's the social license to operate. Now going on the second social science theory that is really impacting how scientists and engineers are doing whenever they're in the field or in the community is the concept of ecological distribution conflict. EDC is just a collective term that involves claims against environmental injustices. So the environmental injustice actually is a wide field. It can include things about hazards. It can include things about how your manufacturing procedures are happening. It can even include the so-called climatic injustices. So EDC is something that has gained popularity in the most recent past. And why is it so? Because the resistance actually does not only involve a single individual or a local community. Now, more often than not, alliances are actually being put up that involves not only local, but also international institutions. So it is, especially in the mining sector, it is normal for us that we have a project in the Visayas, but we'll be receiving letters of protest coming from the Netherlands, coming from Hong Kong, coming from China, for a simple reason that these are letters coming from NGOs and civil society organizations that are allied with the community where the project is. So that's basically the main difference right now. EDC has so expanded that wider alliances is really the norm of the game. So the issues basically include the environmental issues involving the environment and the cost and benefit. And more often than not, you hear this that people say that they were not actually asked about coming out with a particular decision. The participation in the decision-making process is being put into question. And they also feel that more often than not, companies would not really give them the due recognition in terms of group identity. Whether you like it or not, especially among our IP brothers, this is something critical. Their identity, their assurance, the company's assurance that in the decision-making process, they would actually be part and parcel of the whole thing. So in mining, whether you like it or not, some communities agree about mining, and some disagree. It's a normal thing. It's not only in mining, but actually normal in any field of studies, in any industry. The literature surveys and real world tells you that those communities that agree with mining are those communities that are dependent to the company. They're dependent in the sense that their employment, their source of livelihood is actually coming from the company. They know whether it's going to rain or it's going to be sunny, there would actually be a salary coming to them. And in the process, some communities look at a mining company as an institution that would actually depend them from external threats, for a simple reason that these communities on the outside usually are politically marginalized. And of course, the more important thing is that if trust has been gained from the community. But what is highlighted is that communities actually disagree. And of course, we know that there are communities who disagree. And disagreement would actually expand a whole spectrum of issues. The projected environmental impacts, which more or less they say would be negative, the issue of there not being they're not able to participate in the decision-making process. And of course, the presence of alliances makes them stronger. And in the process, they're able to voice out their opinions and opposition. And more often than not, corruption and distrust on the process, on the company, and sometimes in the government is also coming out. But there are people who are fence sitters. There are communities that fence sit on this kind of issues. And they fence it in the sense that they look at they're not sure whether they're going to agree or disagree because they think that if a mining company comes out, they may actually be marginalized, that their agriculture, for example, their agricultural work would actually be marginalized. But they also think that with the corporate social responsibility benefits coming from the company, that's actually good for their children, especially in terms of education. Sometimes they're too remote that their only chance of really developing is the presence of the company. But their attachment to place, especially as a matter of fact, the ancestral domains are very important for the IPs. That's something also that tells them that this is something that we have to preserve. But again, the concept of compensation, of being able to earn from a company, is also a nudge towards agreeing to the presence of a mining company. So in the industry, we try to maintain those who are in agreement with us. We try to convince those who disagree. But if they're just too much, we leave them alone because some people, some institutions can never really be convinced of the feasibility of responsible mining. But companies actually work hard in order to win those fence sitters, those in between, in order for these people in between, this committee in between, to actually join the wagon of those agreeing in a mining project. Right now, on the literature and based on what we know, there are a gamut of protest actions really being done by the wider alliances that we experience right now. The protest action range from court cases to blockades to questioning the environmental impact statement and sometimes the threat to take up arms. These are realities that we're seeing right now in the field. So in terms of ecological distribution conflicts, conflicts and resistance would actually be seen. And the reason for this is that people, the community, would actually demand that they have full control in terms of resource and livelihood. And the presence of a community that is more or less foreign, that is not inherent to the community may actually take out that control. They want to make sure that whatever fact, whatever decision that will be made, they're actually part and parcel of that decision-making process. Monetary compensation is always a problem because sometimes, or more often than not, communities would always feel that they have been shortchanged financially in terms of compensation. The prevailing distrust of companies and government, whether for real or for real, is something that's a reality out in the field. Again, as I was saying a while ago, with the presence of alliances among NGOs, CSOs, and the communities are able to really articulate the different issues that they want to be saying. And in the mining industry, you're looking at communities in the mountains. You're looking at communities that are not really developed, and these are remote areas wherein the state, the government, is not really present. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of instances that in these areas, it's the mining company that actually becomes the substitute for the government. That would actually be also a cause for resistance among the communities. So whether we like it or not, we have to address the ADC. We have to address the ecological distribution conflict. And how do you address that? Conflicts must not be allowed to escalate. This is the reason why you have to have the social skill, because if you fight anger with anger, there's no way that you can actually resolve things. So conflicts must not be allowed to escalate. You have to make sure that you're dealing with the true representatives in a feudalistic society like the country, like the Philippines. There are many people who claims to be the true representative, the true leader of a community or of a tribe. You better make sure that you do your work in order to ensure that the person you're dealing with really represents the vested interest of the community. Whether you like it or not, justifiable demands must be addressed for a simple reason that no social license to operate would actually be given if their justifiable demands are not addressed. And as I said a while ago, things change through time. So re-engagement must always be applied, especially if there's a change in leadership, especially if there's a change in the scientists or engineers actually dealing with them. And everything should be in the context of ethical consideration observed among the shareholders, which are basically the investors, and of course the stakeholders, which deals with mostly the community. So we've seen the importance of social license to operate, with the community becoming our partners. We have learned a while ago why it's very important for us to have an idea of ecological distribution conflict, because these are things that will trigger a lot of conflict with the community if not handled well. The third thing that we're going to discuss is something most of you would actually be familiar with, and that will be the social ecological imbalances or social ecological extremes. More often than not, with what happened in the NCR due to Typhoon Ulysses, or with what happened in Cagayan in northern Luzon due to the opening of the dam, resulting to the massive flooding in Cagayan, what you would see is that most of the discussion centered on hard science and hard engineering measures. But people have forgotten that these things would not only involve hard technical science, but actually would also involve the people. And this is where the social component comes in. And as scientists and engineers, it's very important for us to understand the interaction between the social and the technical aspect of a particular issue. So social ecological imbalances or extremes, excuse me, is basically interactions between social, which is the economy, settlement, among others, and environment, which is ecological, physical system. How people would actually affect the environment and how the environment would actually affect the people. The concept of environmental vis-a-vis ecological science. Now, there are a lot of imbalances, a lot of things happening. And these are generated by multiple drivers that you don't really see, drivers that are very obvious but we tend to ignore, and drivers that are right there waiting to happen. And in the process, the outcomes coming from these imbalances propagate via numerous pathways. So what happened is not only confined to a particular community, but would actually be distributed into a whole array of communities and places. But what is really critical here is that it has been recognized that in an ecosystem-based study, the ecosystem definitely will have to be protected. But in the process, for you to really be successful, people in those ecosystems has to be managed at a broader scale. So the figure you see on the right would show you that in the environmental system, there would be drivers, and in the process, that those drivers would have response, and there would be a feedback mechanism. The same is true for the social system, having drivers and responses, and you can see the complexity once the environmental system and the social system would actually be interacting with each other. So this is important in the sense that whether you like it or not, especially in the geographic setting of the Philippines, this would actually be an everyday reality. So in terms of the social ecological imbalance in extreme, if looking at what happened in the NCR, specifically in Marikina and in Cagayan, some of the science that had been published this year would show that there is a school of thought that says that we have actually breached the tipping points. What does it mean? There's a school of thought that says that the ecological thresholds that we're trying to protect by making sure that we don't go beyond 1.5 degrees centigrade have been breached. I mean to say, whether you like it or not, in the next 30, 50 years, whether we bring down all our CO2 emission, things would actually be the same. There would be a lot of forest fires. There would actually be a lot of polar ice melting. There would be stronger typhoons. That's one school of thought. Another study had shown that right now, in terms of the seas, in our case, the Pacific Ocean and the Philippine Sea, the sea surface temperature is actually higher. We're looking at hotter seas. And if the sea is hot, if the temperature is high, then evaporation would actually be also high. And with increased evaporation, if you have a tropical cyclone, then the tropical cyclone would actually be bringing in a lot of moisture when it starts hitting land. And what is really surprising is that there have been studies that shows the tropical cyclones have also slowed down. Now, why is this critical and why is it important to understand? Because imagine if you have a tropical cyclone or a typhoon that would actually hit on land and it contains a lot of water, it brings a lot of water, and it's actually moving slowly, then it has more opportunity to actually bring down all the rains, in the process causing a lot of hazards and ultimately risk and disaster to the community. So one school of thought says that even though, as a matter of fact, there's this thing called green pandemic recovery, there is a school of thought that says that right now, the global temperature is actually rising on its own. And why are they saying this? Because they were able to show that with the polar ice melting, there would never be there would actually be less ice, less icebergs that would actually be reflecting the rays of the sun. So what happened is that the heat of the sun, instead of being reflected back to the atmosphere, is now being confined and trapped in the globe. And with more heat being trapped on Earth, then it basically results into the warming of the atmosphere and of the surface. Then in the process, with the warming, you actually initiate more evaporation. And when you evaporate water, it increases heat. Why is that so? Because water is a greenhouse gas. And of course, with the melting permafrost, with the melting icebergs, with the melting ice, it contains a lot of carbon, it contains a lot of methane, and all of these are again released on the atmosphere. At the end, we end up with more greenhouse gases, and these basically, as we have learned in basic science, are the ones that trap heat into the Earth system. So, with all of this hard science that we have learned, one thing that we have also recognized, but it's only recently that we're seeing the direct implication, is that our community are growing. People would actually like to develop their lives. They want to urbanize, but in the process, a direct cause of that is that it exacerbate the climate effects. And I'll be showing you later on what this means. So on the figure here, you would see that a melting in the North Pole, in the Arctic, would have an adverse effect in the Antarctica, in Australia, in Europe, and in the US. So whether you like it or not, there are literatures that says the strong wildfires that we're seeing in California would actually be a feedback mechanism of the melting of the ice caps in the North Pole. So all of these things that we're seeing would actually be looped together for a simple reason that you have to look at the surface Earth atmosphere the surface atmosphere ecosystem as actually interacting with each other. And in the Philippines, we've seen that happen in terms of Marikina and in terms of Albay, as an example. So if you're into disaster risk reduction management science, you keep on hearing about continuing disasters, compounding disasters, cascading disasters. In this case, I'll just be dealing with continuing and cascading disasters. If you recall, last year, October, November, December, we have seen a lot of earthquakes happening in Mindanao. And it caused a lot of pains, it caused deaths, a lot of destruction on infrastructure and livelihood. And in the process, the Philippine government has no choice but to start rehabilitating and rebuilding Mindanao. But we have not yet stopped, we have not yet completed the rehabilitations in Mindanao. Then in January, you have Taal volcano erupting, and considering that it's very near Metro Manila, you can actually see the massive disruption that was caused by this total this volcanic eruption. Again, we haven't finished our rehab work in Mindanao. Then the government has to shift resources in order to help the people in Batangas and the surrounding areas. And after that, in February 2020, COVID-19, the Black Swan started, and in the process, we have the longest lockdown mechanism applied in the country. And of course, we have a series of cyclones, excuse me, that happened in the country, resulting into landslides, flooding, and a lot of disastrous effects. That would actually be a good example of a continuing disaster, wherein the government or the country has not yet fully recovered, and suddenly another event would actually be causing a lot of hardship on the community and on the people. Then the difficult thing is the concept of cascading disaster, which is actually a function of the so-called toppling domino metaphor. What does it mean? If you start looking at the setting, Northern Luzon was never hit by Ulysses. But it was after Ulysses that Northern Luzon, specifically Cagayan, has the worst flooding it had in the last 40 years. And why would that be? For a simple reason that some of the rains coming from the rain band of Ulysses had fallen into the watershed of the Magatnam. So although Northern Luzon was not along the track line of Typhoon Ulysses, some of the peripheral negative impacts of the water of the rain resulted into the massive flooding of Cagayan. For a simple reason that before Ulysses arrived, there have been several tropical cyclones that had already affected Northern Luzon. Cagayan, the flooding in Cagayan is a good example of a cascading disaster. So you would also read in the literature about correlated disaster, concurrent disaster, and what I was stating a while ago, the sequential disaster. So all of these things are realities. And if you're working in a community, you should be able to actually explain to the people all about these things so that the people can be your partner in addressing most of the problems spawned by these hazards and risks. So I will have to remind everybody that hazard can either be natural or technological. No question about that. But disasters, there's no such thing as natural disaster. Disaster would always be man-made. There can only be disaster because the coping capacity, the resiliency of the people or of the community has been breached. So never ever use the term natural disaster, which recently a lot of people have been writing about. There's no such thing as natural disaster. It's always man-made. So for social ecological imbalances, there are two main reasons that we've heard after the event in Marikina, after the event in Cagayan. They would say that our response are inadequate. People, you hear people being interviewed and saying they were surprised, in spite of the fact that there have been a lot of announcement about the coming typhoon. They were still surprised with it. Some government response institutions would actually be saying, we informed them, we warned them, but people are just too stubborn. And that would really be a problem. If people will not cooperate, especially in evacuation, that will be a problem. Whether you like it or not, it's a changed environment. If you look at the Google Earth, you try to download for Marikina, Antipolo area, San Mateo, Rodriguez, Marikina, Antipolo area. If you look at the slice of Google Earth maps from 2008, 2009 Ondoy, all the way to 2011, 2015, 2018, and 2020, you can actually see a major difference in terms of the topographic and geomorphic configuration of the area. There are more subdivisions, there are more cultural infrastructure right now in the San Mateo, Rodriguez, Marikina, Antipolo area. So for people to actually be saying that this is actually far worse than Ondoy, this is something that they forgot, that what was true in 2009 is not necessarily true now because of the massive changes in the geomorphic system of, in this case, NCR. And of course, as I was saying a while ago, slower typhoon, more rains to be dumped. And in the process, you have your soil being saturated with water, which in the process becomes more susceptible to landsliding. And bridge dams, these are artificial dams in the upstream. You have trees and rocks that form dams on your rivers. And when there's too much water, they break away, and in the process resulting into massive flooding. Then you hear and read a lot, so many experts coming out that because we did not fulfill our plans, we did not widen this particular part of the river, we failed to dredge, and our flood control was not implemented. But all of these are actually in hindsight. But these things are things that we know that we should have done yesterday. And of course, what is really sad is that some people would act, as a matter of fact, I've heard at least two NGOs saying that we should stop hyping resiliency. In the process, instead of hyping resiliency, the government just have to do better. I don't agree with that, and I'll explain to you later on why that is a wrong notion of how to adapt and how to address resiliency. But let me show you, let me take you to the picture on the left, which shows that in based on worldwide database, we have three kinds of hazard. Geologic hazard, which deals with earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Climatic hazards, which is tropical cyclones, the wind, and of course, the geomorphic hazard. If you start to look at this, the geomorphic hazard, and geomorphic hazard means the changes that people make in the topography, in the geomorphology on the surface. So you would actually see that the geomorphic hazards would actually be higher than geologic and climatic hazards. Now, what's critical about this? For geologic hazard, very difficult to really address because at this point in time, nobody can actually forecast or predict earthquakes. For volcanic eruption, we place this buffer zone that people cannot actually live into. We've seen the negative aspect of that when people becomes too bullheaded and still live with that, and there's an eruption and people get killed. For climatic hazard, we keep on hearing about climatic justice. We keep on hearing about reducing our greenhouse gases emissions, but this is very difficult for a simple reason that we have no control on other countries' decision and other countries' activities. So asking for climatic justice is good, but at the same time, it's beyond our control. But it's totally different when you're dealing with geomorphic hazard because as scientists and engineers, we can help the community to plan ahead to make sure that they will be able to live safely in their community. There are three parameters that we can actually apply in terms of environmental science. And that's making sure that we actually do hard or soft interventions, and acceptance is also a viable option. What do I mean by acceptance? If somebody has no place to go and it's in a hazard prone area, there's nothing wrong with that person to be staying in that hazard prone area. However, the caveat would actually be he has to make sure that there's an early warning system that will allow him to go away from his place should there be a potential hazard that can happen in his area. So engineers and scientists would really be a major factor in making sure that geomorphic disasters happening right now can actually be mitigated, minimized, if not totally eradicated. So what are the takeaway message for the social ecological imbalances? And this is something that I think you yourself have seen. Our early warning system in the government, in the country, is actually good. It is comparable to other countries. I should know when I was in Pagasa 10, 15 years ago, it's a lot better right now. I'm really impressed. The technology is being utilized well. We had a lot of competent scientists and engineers right now working in the government in DRM. The structure is there. NDRMC is working. Of course, there's a move to come out with the Department of Risk Reduction, but that's another topic for another talk. The land and infrastructure component has to be worked on because, as I was saying a while ago, sometimes the development that are actually happening are not are not really planned accordingly. People would always be saying the reason for that is that we don't have a comprehensive land use plan. That's not really true. You don't need to have a clue to come out with an appropriately planned and designed community. Our communication is good. At 2 o'clock in the morning, you get to wake up because of this real noise coming from the warning coming from the ANDRMC. So communication is good. However, the two things that we really have to work on would actually be the response aspect and, of course, understanding. Because unless people are really on board, that they understand what's really happening, then this will really be a vicious cycle. So what's the takeaway message in the social ecological imbalances, social ecological extremes? It's a changed world. For people to be comparing 2009 Ondoy to 2020 Ulysses is actually comparing apples and oranges. What was true and correct in 2009 is not anymore applicable right now. Totally different. So, and this is the reason why with so little amount of water brought about dumped by Ulysses compared to that of Ondoy, you have more massive flooding in Marikina because the whole thing, the geomorphology, the topography, the whole structure of that part of NCR has changed. So what was applicable then is not anymore true today. So we should not be comparing these kind of things. Then you keep on saying, you keep on hearing and reading that we have the politicians, we have the local chief executives saying, now we have to make sure that we relocate people to safer grounds. It has been found, not only in the Philippines, but worldwide, that managed retreat, the government, the institution being the one relocating people, has never worked. Because managed retreat is something that's forced on the community, something forced on the people. The only thing that would survive would be a community-led transfer. So between managed retreat and community-led transfer, if you're an advisor to a politician or to a local chief executive, any relocation should actually be community-led. It cannot be top-down. It has to be a bottom-up approach. And we've seen again, we observed this in Ondoy and other disasters, but we have seen this again in Ulysses and in the massive flooding again, that our disaster preparedness and planned response always buckle down during crunch time. And that is okay. We cannot do anything about that, especially if the rescue workers are also victims of the whole hazard affair. What is critical is how fast we can actually recover from this initial fiasco. How fast we're able to really start the rescue, repair, and rehabilitation. And as I was saying a while ago, we should really celebrate people's resiliency. If people claims that the government is not doing its job, that's why we have this kind of disaster. So be it. It can be another platform for discussion, but it should not be a reason why we should not recognize that the only reason why communities are able to survive, why the communities are able to continue, why people are still able to smile in spite of this hazard, in spite of this disaster, against the backdrop of pandemic, is because of their resiliency. Why take away that component? Why take away hope from these people when in fact that's the only reason why they're able to do what needs to be done? So people's resiliency up to this point in time will have to be celebrated. It should not be tied to the deficiencies that people claim about the government's response. So having seen the social license to operate, having recognized that problems can be associated with ecological distribution conflicts and the realities of time right now, that whether we like it or not, directly or indirectly, are affected in terms of social, ecological extremes, we have to put these three concepts together and try to come out what would be a preferred future. Futures can be probable, can be possible, but more often than not, we want something that's preferred. What's a preferred future? A preferred future is a future that we hope that will happen based on how we like it. But when you start thinking, when you start dealing with futures thinking, it's not really about predicting the future because nobody can predict the future. If you go and ask people, they would always have an idea of what the future will be, but they can never be sure of what it will really be. But futures thinking is really preparing for the future that may happen. There's a big difference with predicting the future and preparing for what can happen. So there are 5 principles that you can apply in futures thinking. One is you don't focus on prediction. As I was saying a while ago, each and everyone, any Tom, Dick, and Harry would always have a prediction. But more often than not, that prediction is wrong. You try to uncover signals, things that are not highlighted but's happening right now. You try to determine that. You try to ascertain its significance now or in the possible future. Then you try to also look at the history, at the past, because there might be something in the past that will actually tell you that the reason why this thing is happening in this present is because of the thing in the past. Then you weave all of this into a larger pattern. You try to see if there's a story, if there's if there's a logic that you can actually derive from all of these things. And one way to do that would actually be to bring the community, bring other people, bring other institutions, and discuss this. Because it has been shown that diverse voices involved in a conversation would actually be bringing a better forecast for a possible future. Why am I placing Zoom, GCash, Paymaya, Lazada, Shopee, and GrabFood in this slide? Because against the pandemic backdrop, these are some of the companies that really made a lot of money right now globally, and they've even expanded their services. And why is that possible? Because once upon a time in their past, they were able to more or less their management, their CEOs, their thinkers were able to more or less see the future. Were able to more or less identify that in the near future, digital technology or digital services, and of course having uh, negotiations with the actual person-to-person relationship would actually be the norm rather than the exception. And in the process, we've seen that Zoom actually became one of the hottest stocks being bought right now for a simple reason that Zoom paved the way for this kind of things that we're having right now. So there are 6 pillars of futures thinking, things that you have to more or less be aware of. And that will be about mapping, anticipation, timing, deepening, creating alternatives, and transforming. Very simple. When you start to map, you of course, you look at the past, determine the present, and in the process, come out with possibilities in the future. And you anticipate future issues and effects. And there's each and everyone would actually have that capacity and capability to actually anticipate possible issues. Then you have to be sensitive to the change patterns. It, right now, digital platform is the way to go. So whether you like it or not, if you want to be more or less adept to what's happening, you have to have a shift on that. Then the concept of deepening is that you have to have a worldview. And when you have a wider perspective coming from myths, legends, and metaphor should also be considered because these things actually happen in the context of an occurrence in the past that directly or indirectly may actually have an effect in the present and in the future. Then by creating alternatives, you come out with what do I want to happen in the future, and that will be your preferred future. And once you have an idea of your preferred future, this is what I want to be in the future, then you try to transform. You try to do things that will result into your attainment of your preferred future. So there are a lot of studies on how to do that. One aspect will be the concept or the theory of 3 horizons, wherein horizon 1 is about now, horizon 3 is about future. And for you to jump from the present to the future, from horizon 1 to horizon 3, you need a near-term objective, and that will be horizon 2. Horizon 2 is critical, as I will show you later on, because that will actually show you whether you stay in horizon 1 or you go all the way to horizon 3. So Tetlak, Professor Tetlak is a professor dealing with global forecasts, and he and his research team came out with a survey that lasted for 20 years. He asked several thousands of people to actually forecast what will happen in the next 20 years. And after 20 years, they were able to determine which of this group of people were able to do a better forecast than the others. From the survey, they came out with 2 groups of people. Those people who actually would concentrate on specific issues, and being concentrated on specific limited issues, they think deeply. They know the details, a lot of things, all the caveats of that specific limited issue. The other school of thought, the other group of people, would actually be people who only do shallow thinking. They would only look at the surface part, but the big difference is that although they're looking only at the shallow part, they're actually looking at a diverse fields. They're looking at different fields that directly or indirectly would actually affect what they're thinking. Scientists and engineers are like this. Some would actually be thinking on a deep level, but on a very specific issue, or some scientists and engineers would actually be thinking on a shallow level, but involving diverse thoughts. Based on this, they were able to show, based on the global survey, that those that thinks on a shallow level, but actually dealing with diverse thoughts, came out to be better forecaster. And the reason for that is it explained. Because those who thought involving diverse thoughts would actually have more inputs, and in the process will be able to come out with a better forecast. And that's the reason why they call this the hedgehogs versus the foxes theory. Hedgehogs are those narrow-minded, whereas the foxes would actually be those diverse thoughts. And whether you like it or not, this can be trained. People can be trained to be foxes rather than hedgehogs. So to be better forecasters, there's an acronym that Professor Tetla came up with. It's called CHAMP. Comparisons are critical. There's an issue, you have to compare all available data. Historical trends can assist, yes, but you should never extrapolate so much that it will actually be similar to a prediction. Average opinions over wider groups is important, and this is the reason why, as a matter of fact, all futures thinker would always be saying that having a lot of diverse thoughts, having extreme ideas would actually help in coming out with a better forecast. Mathematical models matter. As a matter of fact, data science management started with this program. And whether you like it or not, you have biases. It depends on your culture, it depends on your race, it depends on your belief. These are allowed in coming out with futures forecast. So in having these kind of things, Professor Tetlak would say that you can actually be better forecaster compared with the rest of the population. So, what is the importance of all of these things? You know SLO, you know how to avoid conflicts in terms of EDC, and you more or less have an idea on coming out with the appropriate design to address the social, ecological imbalances and extremes. By having these three theories, applying it in the futures thinking, you have to see the future in the present. What is happening right now that we know or that we think would actually be the norm of the future? Similar to Zoom 10 years ago, when they started as a company, they were a small company trying to make people talk digitally. And it was only during the pandemic that people realized the importance of Zoom. And later on, other platforms coming in, MS Teams and other things. But the point here is that seeing the future in the present is critical. If you see Horizon 1, the present, from the start, and as you go towards the future, Horizon 1 would actually degrade, would actually become smaller in terms of participation. But for Horizon 3, there is a small part here of Horizon 3 in the present. And as you go through time and to your vision, of course, Horizon 3, the future, would actually be the norm. But jumping from Horizon 1 to Horizon 3 is not that simple. You have to have a bridge, and that will be your Horizon 2, the transition from the present to the future. But you have to be careful in dealing with Horizon 2. We know for a fact, as scientists and engineers, that from Horizon 1 to Horizon 3, from the present to the future, the critical thing is innovation. But if you fall in love with the innovation that comes out and you try to really develop this, then it becomes a sustaining innovation. And if it's a sustaining innovation, then it will actually not bridge you to Horizon 3. It will actually trap you in staying in Horizon 1. What you want in terms of innovation is the transformative innovation, things that are painful to accept from the outset, but ultimately you will see will become the norm of the future. It's through transformative innovation during Horizon 2 that a person can jump from Horizon 1, which is the present, all the way to Horizon 3 in the future. So this is the concept of the three horizons, wherein there are things that you observe right now that may seem to be irrelevant, but later on would actually be the major component in the transformative innovation that will bring us to Horizon 3. So once you have whipped all of these theories, these social skills together, scientists and engineers, I think, will come up to be better equipped in dealing with people and the community. So we have to understand that our technical know-how is important, but being social informers would actually make us more relevant, would actually enhance our role in the company or in the university where we work on. So for us in the geoscience, there are four things that are critical to us, which I think would also be important for other scientists and other engineers. Trust. You have to make sure that you always reaffirm and you renew the confidence of the community and people to you and your company. In terms of relocation, which I think especially for scientists and engineers involved in this, community-led relocation would actually be more in fact effective compared to managed retreat. An imposed managed retreat has been shown not to succeed. It's always a community-led, a community-based relocation that would actually make a big difference. Whether you like it or not, on a personal basis, in terms of your profession or being part of the company, you always do scenario planning. You have to look at the future and the present. That's one way actually to prepare for black swans. That's one way to prepare for things that may not happen, but when it happens, it comes out with a disastrous negative impact. So if people are saying that we prepare for the next risk, we prepare for the next black swan, scenario planning would actually be important. And of course, when you communicate, you have to make sure that you're understandable. The community, your partners, the other people have to understand what you're saying. And more importantly, it has to be actionable. What's the point on saying something that will not actually be implemented? So there are other social performance aspects that you may want to look into. One is, of course, you have to make sure that you maintain a meaningful and positive engagement with your community and with your people. It's important for you to know who your community are, who are the people you're dealing with. Because once you have an idea who they are and you engage with them in a meaningful way, then you can actually decide on what kind of investment you're going to give in the community. Investment in the community doesn't always mean giving money. It can actually be an investment that other people, other communities will appreciate more than money. So in summary, this is I think the second to last slide that I have. If you want to be an insightful social performer, learn about the social license to operate, appreciate what ecological distribution conflict can actually do to your project, and be aware of the imbalances caused by the interaction between the social and ecological component, and try to weave all of these things and come out with a preferred future. And in coming out with the fair future, make sure that the things that you're planning would actually be implementable, doable, and understandable. If you're able to do that, you would actually be able to address ESG, the environmental aspect, the social aspect, and the governance aspect. And again, if you look at this, you're looking at attainment of the quadruple bottom line that involves people, planet, profit for a greater purpose of making the community really a co-owner of your project. So before I say my thank you, tomorrow there will be an international symposium spearheaded by UPLB SESAM. The title is a mouthful, but it's really about COVID-19 and what would actually be our exit strategy. Uh, in my case, I'm inviting you. I'm going to talk about the mineral industries, finding the future in the present. So it's really about black swan, about the great resets, about green recoveries. My talk will be on 11:35 to 12:05 tomorrow. This is a free international conference. Uh, Other topics to be discussed will be African swine flu. There will be a talk about natural hazards and our international negotiations, not only in terms of climate, but also in terms of the environment. So if you're free tomorrow, it starts at 8 o'clock, ends at 4:35. I invite you to attend this conference. And with that, I again thank you for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts with our PUP community. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Dr. Yumul. We are now on the open forum part of our webinar. Um, Anybody who has a question can uh, type it on the chat room. Sir, a few questions. Regarding social development or social projects, like you discuss social license to operate, ecological distribution conflict, and the SEI or social ecological imbalances. Where do you put the concept of just transition or the element of just transition into these processes?
Yeah, you have no choice. You have to look at it holistically, and this is the reason why I was saying a while ago that if you deal with the community, you just don't deal with the strong force. As a matter of fact, you have to make sure that you also deal with the other component of the community, especially the weak ones. So the concept of justice in terms of SLO is actually a very strong component. Yeah.
So,
Did,
sir,
did I get did I answer you right or not?
yes, sir. So another question would be you emphasize the importance of soft skills. Other people would call it actually essential skills. And in a book of 21 lessons for the 21st century, the author said that we need to develop 4 C's in our students in the future generation, which is creativity, communication skills, collaboration, and critical thinking. Sir, as an engineer, how would you advise institutions to develop creativity among engineers? Because at the end of the day, engineers are stereotyped as someone who is logical and not creative.
That's right. As a matter of fact, that's something that we have to explain to our students that although we're being stereotyped as something that's really pigeon backs into something that's so hard and so cold-hearted, they
Yes,
have no
sir.
choice. If they want to succeed in the future, they have to have the skill. Now, how do you implement that? Make them meet more people. When I say
Mm,
what I mean by people, it's not really the university crowd. Show them the realities on the ground. Show them the people outside, and in the process, they will be able to actually appreciate what being an engineer means and what their role is in the country. I think what is critical here is that each and everyone should be able to determine and know what his role, his or her role in coming out with the development of the country.
yes.
Usually right now, in the so-called flat organization, we make sure that from the janitor all the way to the executive assistant, all the way to the CEO, when you talk and ask them one thing, they would actually be answering the same thing because everybody would actually be in the loop. They would know what's happening and they would actually know their role in attaining a specific goal. Now, for students, that's very important that they have to know what their role is and put them on the ground. They have to see how applicable their work is to really uplift the lives of the people. It's important.
Yes, sir. I agree. It is important for us to embed to our students that they have greater responsibility in our society.
Definitely, definitely.
Sir, you also said in your discussion that we must realize that this is a changed world, that we cannot actually compare what happens 10 years ago or 5 years ago to what is happening now, because that is what is happening now is different, or the scenario now is different from from the scenario before. But the conflict also there is the Filipino masses don't know that there is this information gap and knowledge gap when it comes to the changes that is happening in our society, because most of these changes are really technical and they cannot be consumed by the masses. So how do you think we could address such an information gap in order for us to correct this proliferating notion that this is worse than that, or those wrong comparisons?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that's really a social issue. But I'll give you two survey results
Okay.
that really shows you the complexity of the Philippine society.
Yes,
In the
sir.
recent math science education survey, out of
Yeah.
the 58 countries, our elementary students, especially grade 4, were shown to be last
Yeah.
in terms of ranking. We're number 58 out of 58 countries, right? But in terms of the survey that came out last night, in terms of social media utilization, among 100 countries, the number one country that came out to be is actually the Philippines.
Yes.
So having seen that platform, and having seen that Filipinos would actually be able to have that kind of reach, it's really just a matter of coming out with the right messaging, because the platform is there.
Yes,
And of
sir.
course, the concept of fake news is really important and
Yeah.
critical. But the thing is, yeah, the masses may not really understand these kind of things, but ultimately, the masses will have no choice but to really have to know these things. Because the way I see it, in the next, 10, 20 years, the country will actually develop. And when we develop, the state of knowledge among the masses will also go up. A big difference in the Philippine society is that if you go to Japan, everything that's happening is actually broadcast in NHK. That's the government-controlled bureau, and people believe in whatever NHK would actually be saying. If you go to the UK, people would actually be listening to BBC, and BBC would actually be the mouthpiece of the government. We have to make sure that that kind of platform would be something that will also happen in the Philippines. We have PT before, but they have to really work out in terms of making sure that people tend to give confidence and trust in what they're doing. So we just have to look at the best practices in other world and try to replicate this in their country. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sir, you discussed about resiliency as well, and I agree with your comment regarding resiliency, that it is important and we need to give importance to it, because according to one expert in climate change, it is actually an asset. Resiliency is actually an asset in a climate changing world, because
Agree.
at the end of the day, that's how community or the society could cope up with the changing climate. So it
Agree.
is important for us to give importance and to nourish the resiliency within our society, but at the same time, making sure that the government is actually doing as well its job. So,
Agree.
yon.
Agree. Agree.
Sir, you also discussed about the five principles in futures thinking, and what I can say about this is that it's actually modeling, forecasting, and planning, elements of modeling, forecasting, and planning, and in my personal experience in modeling and forecasting, what is challenging in our country, in the Philippines, is that we lack data, or the data that we have is actually not that reliable because it's kulang-kulang. So how do you think we could further improve in this future thinking or forecasting?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, now you're talking like an engineer or a scientist, in the sense that the data is lacking. But if you
Yes.
start looking at futures thinking, the availability of data is just one component. The way to do futures thinking, as a matter of fact, is that you do, if you recall, it's there's a saying, it's always 2020 in hindsight, di ba? When something happens, then people start saying that we should have done this, we should have done that. That's in hindsight. So there is a field that it's not called forecasting, it's called foresighting.
Foresight.
The reverse of hindsight. And foresighting is they apply the concept of backsighting or hindsighting. How do they do that? So for example, it's 2020 right now, and usually when you do this kind of training, they will ask you to close your eyes. Then imagine that. Then they would say, imagine that it's 2025, sorry, 5 years, and in 2025 you open your eyes. Then you open your eyes. Now it's 2025, and when you open your eyes, what you see is that let's use PUP as an example. You have a world-class university, or your laboratories are well equipped, or your faculty members are publishing a lot, and in the process, the students are the most well sought studentry in the industry. So that's 2025. So since it's 2025, what did you do as a university from 2020 to 2025 to arrive at this world-class university? That's the concept of hindsighting. So you try to list down, these are the things that we did. We tried to make sure that we send more people outside to earn their degree. We made sure that we lobby the House of Representatives and Senators to give us more funds. We collaborate with other institutions. So you list down all those things that, quote unquote, you did in the last 5 years, so that by 2025, you are already a world-class university. So that's in hindsight. Kaya nga 2020 vision in hindsight. Then you close your eyes again, and you open your eyes, you're back in 2020. Look at the list. You see a list of what you were supposed to have done from 2020 to 2025 in coming out with the preferred future of PUP as a world-class university. That is the concept of foresighting. That's the concept of yung making sure you don't want a probable future, you don't want a possible future, you want a preferred future. You want something to happen that you want, the something that you envision. And for that to happen, you should be able to come out with means and measures to really achieve that. So yung that would actually be the concept of foresighting. As a matter of fact, there's a field, a field of study that really demarcates the boundary between forecasting and foresighting. So ganun, yung data science is important, but it's only a small component of foresighting.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, I just wanted to, hindi ko lang naintindihan yung concept ng predictable biases. How can biases be predictable? This is on that lux analysis. Yung CHAMP po.
Sige. Well, ano ba magandang example dyan? If you have followed the US election, di ba?
Yes, sir.
You see the Republicans in their map,
Yes, sir.
all the red aspect in their maps. These are, whether you like it or not, they're always diehard Republicans. They would always vote Republicans. So if their leader, which in this case is President Trump, says that coronavirus is really nothing, that you don't need to wear a mask, everybody would be attending his how do you call it, his meetings without wearing a mask, without social distancing. This is in spite of the fact that they have seen a lot of people already suffering from the virus, already dying. But this is their culture. This is their bias.
Their bias.
whether you like it or not, you have to do that. As a matter of fact, if you read the history of how Biden won Arizona, he actually utilized this, making sure that the predictable bias are actually addressed in such a way that those who are Republicans will go Democrats. So yun lang
Nice.
ano, yung sa mga Pilipino, we also have biases, di ba? And whether
Yeah.
you like it or not, you have to accept that. That's the reality.
Yeah. Okay, sir. Thank you. That ends our open forum. Thank you for a very insightful talk
Thank you.
regarding social performers. Um, Next would be a synopsis coming from the Director of Intellectual Property Management Office, Dr. Gino L. Andres. Doc Andres?
Uh, Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much,
Morning.
Dr. Yumul, for the very informative talk today. I am very honored to deliver to you the synopsis of today's lecture. Okay, so the talk of Dr. Yumul gave us insights on the significance of scientists and engineers as an effective performers in their respective fields in the geosciences perspective. The motivation of Dr. Yumul's talk is that technical expertise alone is not enough. One should need to consider always the human or social aspect. Dr. Yumul elaborated the importance of SLO, or social license to operate, which refers to the ongoing acceptance of a company or industry's standard business practice and operating procedures by its employees, stakeholders, and the general public. There, he emphasized the normative key elements, which include the social legitimacy, social credibility, and social trust. He also mentioned that social license to operate change through time, which is why longevity is necessary. Engagement quality is critical. Parameters on changes through time must be considered and anticipated. Acceptance does not always mean approval, and the PAC revisitation is a must. Dr. Yumul further discussed the ecological distribution conflicts, or EDC, which refers for collective claims against environmental injustices. He discussed about the contributing factors which initiate conflict and resistance, which include resource and livelihood control demand, lack of participation to decide their path, monetary compensation related to losses, revealing distrust to companies and government, presence of alliances between communities and NGOs, and remote resource frontiers with lack of state presence. Hereafter, he elaborated on how to address these ecological distribution conflicts. Our dear speaker explained the social ecological imbalances and extremes, or the interactions between social and environmental systems. He demonstrated the imbalances generated by multiple drivers with outcomes that propagate via numerous pathways. For instance, self-sustained rise in global temperature and increased community growth and urbanization, exacerbation climate effects. He also mentioned that there is no such thing as natural hazard. Hazard is always caused by the people. Moreover, Dr. Yumul described different types of hazards, such as climatic hazard, geomorphic hazard, and geomorphic hazard. Furthermore, Dr. Yumul mentioned engineers and scientists would play a vital role in addressing these hazards. Dr. Yumul further discussed the futures thinking, which he insinuates that futures thinking is not about predicting the future, whereas it is about preparing for futures that may happen. In addition, Dr. Yumul presented some of the companies that manages to accumulate wealth in time of pandemic, because they are the ones who saw digital platform would be utilized in the future. Hereafter, he explained the 6 pillars of futures thinking, the Tetlux analysis, which could be used to have a better forecasters and the future in the present, wherein sustainability, innovation, and transformative innovation are the key driving factors to attain better future. Finally, Dr. Yum will talk about the social performers and its aspects, which involves meaningful and positive engagement, social-based knowledge documentation, and strategic investment in the community. Maraming salamat po, Dr. Yumul, at mabuhay po kayo.
Thank you, Dr. Andres. Now, to award the certificate, may I call on the Dean of the College of Engineering, Dr. Remedios G. Ado. Dr. Ado.
Hello. Good morning. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Ayan. Okay. Polytechnic University of the Philippines. Polytechnic University of the Philippines. This certificate of recognition is given to Dr. Graciano P. Yumul in grateful acknowledgement of his distinguished and invaluable service rendered as guest of honor and speaker in the Science, Engineering, and Technology Professorial Chairholder Lecture Series with the topic Scientists and Engineers as Effective Social Performers, Insights from the Geosciences. Given this 10th day of December 2020 at the PUP Main Campus, Santa Mesa, Manila, Philippines. Signed, Dr. Manuel M. Muhi, University President.
Maraming salamat.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr.
Salamat
Yumul.
po.
Thank you, Dean Ado, and thank you, Dr. Yumul. Now, for our future events, we are inviting you for our Professorial Chairholder Lecture Series for tomorrow, December 11 from 2 to 4 p.m. by Dr. Ryan S. Evangelista. He will discuss IT project management in the globalized society. Also, we are inviting you to a webinar, Sustainable and Healthy Spaces Through Well Building Standard by Engineer Ryan Ben Sabilala. And here's the evaluation link for this particular webinar. So it's time for photo opportunity. May I request everyone to open your camera so as we could take your pictures.
Okay po. Kakount po ako ng 3. Then sa first slide po muna tayo. Pa-open na po ng camera. Okay po. Okay po. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Tingala lang kasi.
Okay po, next slide po tayo. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay po, thank you. Next slide po ulit. Okay po, 1, 2, 3. Okay po, thank you. Next slide po. Okay po, 1, 2, 3. Okay po, thank you po. Last slide na po tayo. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Okay na po.
Thank you.
Okay, to give the closing remarks, may I call on the Dean of the PUP Graduate School, Dr. Elmer G. De Jose.
Hindi si ano.
Morning. Am I heard?
Yes, sir.
Good morning, Sir Tobola. Okay. Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. It is a beautiful rainy day for all of us. There is a saying that when it rains, it pours. In PUP, we are experiencing the outpouring of so much blessings and opportunities. I am talking about the outpour of knowledge and innovations that we all enjoy learning through the several research and development activities that are simultaneously being held today. This morning in the graduate school, we just had the opening program of our virtual international research conference with the Ascendance Asia and the Singapore Institute for Multidisciplinary Disciplines. Our faculty members and students right now are presenting the findings of the research. And this will take place for the next 3 days. Of course, we are very much blessed to have attended this professorial lecture series, the 10th professorial lecture series, which showcases the diverse range of research and academic undertakings of our distinguished lecturers. Thank you very much, Sir Dr. Graciano Yumul Jr., for imparting your knowledge and expertise on how our scientists and engineers could well serve as social performers, especially in these challenging times. In behalf of our Sintang Paralan, we'd like to express our sincerest gratitude for the marvelous learning experience and the meaningful discourse with you. Indeed, we are honored by your presence today. By the way, sir, we accept the challenge of working together towards becoming a research-intensive and world-class Polytechnic University of the Philippines. I would like to take a moment to thank also the university administration, headed, of course, by our energetic president, Engineer Dr. Manuel Muhi, the Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. Emmanuel Guzman, and the Vice President for Research, Extension, and Development, Dr. Ana Rubiga Pasin, for the staunch support to the Professorial Lecture Series program of the university, and all the colleges in the university that made this activity a success. The PUP College of Engineering, headed by our charming Dean, Dr. Remy Ado, the College of Science and Dean Lincoln Bautista, the Institute of Technology and Engineer Ramil Cruz, Dean Cruz, and the Open University system headed by Executive Director Carmencita Castolo. Thank you for making the PUP Graduate School your partner in this worthy academic endeavor. Of course, we cannot fail to recognize the efforts of the PUP Professorial Chairholder Series Program Committee, chaired by Engineer Florinda Oquindo and co-chaired by Engineer Josie Golpeo and Engineer Orlando Pahavera. A round of applause for everyone. I hope that all of us are leaving our Zoom meeting with much invigorated and enlightened knowledge about the topic discussed by our esteemed lecturer. And we hope to see you again in the coming lectures. Thank you and God bless one and all. Maraming salamat po sa ating lahat. Ingat po tayo.
Thank you, Dean De Jose. Before we end the webinar, I would just like to thank our participants. Dr. Manuel M. Muhi, our university president. Participants from PUP Lopez, Quezon City Peso, TIP Manila, DOST ITDI, PUP College of Science, St. Joseph Institute of Technology, FEU Institute of Technology, Pangasinan State University, and PICE Kuwait. Thank you, everyone. And to end, give us some time to sing the PUP hymn. Again, thank you everyone. See you tomorrow for another Professorial Shareholder lecture, 2 to 4 p.m. Bye. Okay,
Thank you, sir.
thank you po.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Salamat po. Congratulations, Ma'am Ado.
Thank you sa inyo lahat. Congrats, congrats. Successful na naman tayo.
Thank you, sir.
Isang iglap, mga tinatakpan, mahigpit na yakap, kailang pagkawalan. Dumaan ng dilim, na puno ng bituin, sa iyong lilim, pag-ibig mas nagningning. Hinahanap ang kahapon sa panibagong ngayon. Marami ang nagbago, ngunit di ang pagmamahal mo. Ngayong Pasko, diriwang ang mundo, sa pag-ibig mo'y may himala, may panibagong simula. Ngayong Pasko, pabalik ang saya, dahil ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Ikaw lang, ikaw lang, ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Ikaw lang, ikaw lang, ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Kami ay may lakas na harapin ang bukas. Ikaw ang gabay sa bawat landas. Gawin kaming liwanag para sa isa't isa. Pag-asang sumisinag sa pamilya at sa kapwa. Ngayong Pasko, magdiriwang ang mundo, sa pag-ibig mo'y may himala, may panibagong simula. Ngayong Pasko, babalik ang saya, dahil ikaw ang liwanag, ang ligaya. Ikaw lang, ikaw lang, ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Ikaw lang, ikaw lang, ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Sa mahabang gabi, tumigil ang mundo, sa pag-asang dala mo, tuloy ang Pasko. Liwanag, ligaya, light, joy, claridad, alegria, kasanan, kasadya, lamig, kalipay, sa hayag, kapuyakan, kahayag, kalipay, raniyag, ragsak, kalibawalay, katsigay, lilini, liwanag, kaugmaan, suluating tula, kibuyot, pupi, illumina, joy, yang guang shiway, lumiye, joa, the children, anuwa, para, orisheros, alegria. Liwanag at ligaya, nagmumula sa iyo, ikakalat sa mundo. Ngayong Pasko, magdiriwang ang mundo, sa pag-ibig mo'y may himala, may panibagong simula. Ngayong Pasko, babalik ang saya, dahil ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Ngayong Pasko, magdiriwang ang mundo, sa pag-ibig mo'y may himala, may panibagong simula. Ngayong Pasko, babalik ang ligaya, at ligaya. Ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Sa isang iglap, mga ngiti na takpan, mahigpit na yakap, kailang pagkawalan. Dumaan ng dilim na puno ng bituin, sa iyong lilim, pag-ibig mas nagningning. Hinahanap ang kahapon sa panibagong ngayon. Marami ang nagbago, ngunit di ang pagmamahal mo.
Ngayong Pasko, magdiriwang ang mundo. Sa pag-ibig mo'y may himala, may panibagong simula. Ngayong Pasko, babalik ang saya, dahil ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Ikaw lang, ikaw lang, ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Ikaw lang, ikaw lang, ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya.
Kami ay may lakas na harapin ang bukas. Ikaw ang gabay sa bawat landas. Gawin kaming liwanag para sa isa't isa. Pag-asang sumisinag sa pamilya at sa kapwa.
Ngayong Pasko, magdiriwang ang mundo. Sa pag-ibig mo'y may himala, may panibagong simula. Ngayong Pasko, babalik ang saya, dahil ikaw ang liwanag, ang ligaya. Ikaw lang, ikaw lang, ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Ikaw lang, ikaw lang, ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Sa mahabang gabi, tumigil ang mundo, sa pag-asang dala mo, tuloy ang Pasko. Liwanag, ligaya, light, joy, claridad, alegria, kasanang kasadya. Lamang kalipay, sa hayag kapuyakan, kahayag kalipay, raniyag raksak, kalibawalikat, sigay lilini, liwanag kaupahan, suluating tula. Kibuyo na pupi, illumina joy, yang guang shiway, lumiyay joa, the children, adawa para orisheros alegria. Liwanag at ligaya, nagmumula sa iyo, ikakalat sa mundo.
Ngayong Pasko, magdiriwang ang mundo. Sa pag-ibig mo'y may himala, may panibagong simula.
Ngayong Pasko, babalik ang saya, dahil ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Ngayong Pasko, magdiriwang ang mundo. Sa pag-ibig mo'y may himala, may panibagong simula. Ngayong Pasko, babalik ang ligaya at ligaya. Ang liwanag at ligaya. Ikaw lang, ikaw lang, ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Ikaw lang, ikaw lang, ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Ikaw lang, ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Ikaw lang, ikaw lang, ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya.
Sa isang iglap, mga ngiti na takpan, mahigpit na yakap, kailang pagkawalan. Dumaan ng dilim na puno ng bituin, sa iyong lilim, pag-ibig mas nagningning. Hinahanap ang kahapon
sa panibagong ngayon. Marami ang nagbago, ngunit di ang pagmamahal mo. Ngayong Pasko, pagdiriwang ang mundo. Sa pag-ibig mo'y may himala, may panibagong simula. Ngayong Pasko, babalik ang saya, dahil ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Ikaw lang, ikaw lang, ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Ikaw lang, ikaw lang, ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya.
Kami ay may lakas na harapin ang bukas. Ikaw ang gabay sa bawat landas. Gawin kaming liwanag para sa isa't isa. Pag-asang sumisinag sa pamilya at sa kapwa.
Ngayong Pasko, magdiriwang ang mundo. Sa pag-ibig mo'y may himala, may panibagong simula. Ngayong Pasko, babalik ang saya, dahil ikaw ang liwanag, ang ligaya. Ikaw lang, ikaw lang, ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Ikaw lang, ikaw lang, ikaw ang liwanag at ligaya. Sa mahabang gabi, tumigil ang mundo. Sa pag-asang dala mo, tuloy ang Pasko. Liwanag, ligaya, light, joy, claridad, alegria, kasanang kasadya. Lamang kalipay, sa hayag kapuyakan, kahayag kalipay, raniyag raksak. Halimbawa, likat, sigay, lilili, liwanag, kaugman, suluating tula. Kibuyo na pupi, ilumina, joy, yang bang shiway, lumiye, joa. And the children, adawa, para, ora, shares, alegria. Liwanag at ligaya, nagmumula sa iyo, ikakalat sa mundo.
Ngayong Pasko, magdiriwang ang mundo. Sa pag-ibig mo'y may himala, may panibagong simula.
Ngayong Pasko, babalik ang saya,